I wanted to share a quick reflection with you. Sometimes I look at the comments and videos, and people post all kinds of things, and I think some of those things are teaching moments. And you might have noticed that in lectures, sometimes I'll wear traditional clothes, Pakistani clothes. I'll wear Afghani clothes. I've even worn Malaysian clothes, and I wear American clothes and Western clothes, and I'll wear a suit and a tie and things like that. And we know in many Muslim cultures, we've been raised to think that when you dress in a way that is representative of your culture. So if I'm from Pakistan and I'm wearing a shalwar kameez, then I'm dressed Islamically. And if somebody's wearing their traditional Sudanese dress, then they're dressed Islamically. And if somebody's wearing the batik in Malaysia, then they're dressed Islamically. But if somebody's wearing a suit and a tie, they're dressed like the Westerner or like the non-Muslims. It's a secular dress. And this notion actually is something that I want to help all of you understand, at least from my point of view. I'm not saying that I have the correct understanding, but to the best of my ability. What I've been able to understand about this subject is, and it's something that I thought about for a long time, and then I traveled to Oxford a few years ago and asked Dr. Akram Nadwi, one of my favorite people in the world, a hadith researcher, can you help me define Islamic dress? Like, if I want to attend an Eid gathering, and I want to dress my best, and to me, my best, I was raised not in a very traditional setting. And when we went somewhere dressed up, we wore a suit. My dad wore a suit. I wore a suit. We wore ties. And that was normal for us. That's the culture in which we were grown. So is that un-Islamic because non-Muslims wear it? And he had some really interesting things to say. I'll add some things to what he said too. He said, actually, in his understanding, the sunnah would be to dress your best. Our religion gives us guidance on how we should cover ourselves. The way that the clothing should be modest, it should be decent. But the style of clothing, and of course for men there's guidelines like we don't wear gold and silk, right? And what parts of our body should be covered and how decently they should be covered. But outside of that, whether I decide to dress in cultural garments that are American or Canadian, or they're Chinese or African or Afghani or Pakistani or Bangladeshi or Malaysian, it doesn't actually matter. And he said the sunnah would be to dress your best. To dress your actual best. So to me personally, I have absolutely no distinction between wearing the nicest shalwar kameez I have or the nicest suit and tie that I have. It's not one is more Islamic than the other. Just like somebody who, someone from the Eastern, from South Asia or from the Arab world or whatever is no more a Muslim than an American, born and raised here from whatever background. If they're white, black, Hispanic, if they're Caucasian, if they're whatever background they have, if they become Muslim, they're just as Muslim as everybody else. All cultures are, the diversity of our cultures is something Allah Himself created. He Himself created this diversity. So there's nothing wrong or un-Islamic about that. And then just finally, I'll add something to that. If today we had there was a time machine, and Abu Jahl from the Prophet's time, right? He traveled through time and he showed up in front of your house and he walked by your house dressing how he used to dress back in the day. You would look at him and you'd say, MashaAllah, I wonder what the sheikh's name is. Because he'd have a beard, he'd have a turban, he'd have a thoban, and you would think that this guy's dressed really Islamically. The worst enemies of Islam were dressed in Arab garments, right? So the Arab clothing isn't Islamic clothing. Pakistani clothing isn't Islamic clothing. What is Islamic is actually just you dressing nicely. So for me, more recently, I developed a thought that when I'm teaching the Quran, when I'm sharing something about the Quran, especially my lecture series on a deeper look, that I'm doing something that I consider one of the most noble opportunities. Like I'm sharing something, I'm studying the Quran, and I'm teaching the best of what I know about it and sharing it with as many people as I can. And so when I do that, I should actually dress my best. And so I'm going to try to do that. So to me, there's no harm in dressing that way. I don't think anybody who studies fiqh deeply and follows the usul traditionally would actually differ in any of these conclusions. So sometimes we develop these opinions about Islam that are actually not, they're not from the actual texts. They're not actually sourced in the Quran and the Sunnah if properly researched. So we just have to become a little more humble about what we don't know. And I pray if I'm incorrect about any of this, I pray that I'm corrected, and I pray that I learn better, inshallah ta'ala. But for now, to the best of my understanding, so long as the guidelines of what should be covered and modesty are observed, clothes from any culture, any culture are absolutely acceptable.